How long did this take
Well, we
from
started.
idea conception to working prototype?
So we started basically 2018. We were part of an initial mission with some Europeans to go back to the moon and go back to the Apollo 17 landing site. So we started 2018. We started working then with NASA in 2020 when, so a couple of years for the initial first prototype. And then that mission with the Europeans never flew for a number of reasons that were really outside of our control. So we went to NASA and said, we basically have built a system. We designed it, we built it, we tested it. Our mission went away. We want to fly this system. So that's when this all started, and NASA encouraged us to submit a proposal. Actually, we submitted two proposals, one to go to the moon and one to go to the International Space Station. And then we're fortunate enough that they selected it and they funded it to refine it and continue to build it and test it. And yeah, it's generally for building such a network is a 2 to 3 year development process. And then you have a lot of testing, a lot of integration with your mission partners.
By the way, I will definitely open up the questions at the end, but if you raise your hand, I'll try to work us in as we go. So for the startups that are here, sometimes they pivot or have a sort of wild idea that they need to convince their board to do. You have a similar issue with a relationship with Nokia. Did it take a lot of convincing to get other stakeholders behind this?
Well, I think initially it was viewed as a marketing exercise. For us, in the Bell Labs DNA is really to take the extreme version of the problem. We like to look at hard technical problems, and then we take the extreme version. So deploying this network on the moon, for us, looked really like an extreme version of an enterprise network. If you think about a mine in Australia or wind farm or remote oil rig, and you want to provide a network in that enterprise environment, the applications and the use case from a communication perspective are very, very similar to what we envision you would need on the moon. It just happens to be very far. It happens to be a very harsh environment. But it's basically what we do every day, but the extreme version of it. So for us, it wasn't just a marketing exercise. It wasn't a marketing gimmick.
Is it safe to say for you it was, I get the impression from you could care less about the marketing side, and maybe not care less. You're much more focused on the engineering challenge at hand versus then there is a byproduct that is great marketing that goes with this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think at the heart, we're a research organization, we're an engineering organization. We solve technical problems. So that was the heart of it, and that was what attracted us to this in the first place. But ultimately, the question is always, well, how many of these are you selling? How big is the market? So that business aspect comes in. The marketing aspect is there because you want to also drive thought leadership. And I think one of the things we've done is use marketing and communicate about what our vision is and our ambition to also drive thought leadership, not just within NASA, but also with others in the space industry.
What were some of the practical hurdles, like what started breaking, what doesn't work, what do you have to engineer, especially, I'm sure everything's very deliberate, but what were some things that, like, oh, you'll never believe this broke because of X, Y, Z?
How much time do we have here? Well, I think the easy part, let me start with the easy part, is how you send bits and bytes. From a basic communication protocol perspective, communication infrastructure is very, very similar to actually the first product or the first unit we built was completely built on a Nokia small cell product. The hard part is the integration, hardware-software integration, because the one thing that is really important in space is size, weight, and power. So how do you get the size, the weight, and the power consumption down as much as possible, because you pay a premium for sending every pound or every kilo of equipment to the moon. So size, weight, and power, and then it's a super harsh environment. It starts with having to survive the rocket launch. So you're pulling 7G on a Falcon 9 at launch, you have to survive that. No other Nokia product is exposed to 7Gs. So it's the launch, the transit, the landing, the temperature variations, the radiation environment. So it's incredibly difficult from an environmental perspective.
Where do you test 7Gs around here?
Well, we have some test chambers and test facilities actually in Murray Hill. So some of the environmental testing we do here. And some other, we also go to other facilities, NASA facilities, or other test facilities around the world for shock, vibration, acceleration, vacuum operation, radiation, and so forth. So we use what we have internally and then go available facilities outside.
And what broke that you were surprised broke in some of these tests?
I think it's some of the small things like connectors, where we changed, we took basically product boards, but then we had to change. We knew the custom parts we needed to build, but then there's like small connectors that break. There's actually not that much that we were surprised that broke, but one of the things that we were surprised was how much does it still work after exposure to helium? Because one of the things we discovered is in the fairing of the Falcon 9 at launch, there is helium exposure. And we didn't know about this, and then we built the equipment, and it was like, okay, imagine now the equipment is exposed to helium at the launch, and does it still work afterwards? So we did some tests where we put the equipment into small balloons filled with helium and operated and checked that it still worked. And you can imagine that some people had fun with then like, sniffing the helium balloons and, changing their process.
I'm not going to pretend to be a space expert, though I've certainly read up on this topic for today. Why is there so much helium at launch?
I think that's just something from the rock. I mean,
Byproduct of the rocket.
Byproduct of the fuel, yeah.
Yeah, there was a question over here. Yeah.
As everything is privatized in space, how good is the communication between your company and all these other companies that are starting to go around us to spread the ideas of safety and innovation and share technology? Because there's sometimes some competition, but sometimes it's really just for the good of everybody, how do we make sure that insights get shared?
So if I got the question right, how are the private entities involved in these kinds of missions sharing information? Are you doing so?
Well, I think space is a big ecosystem, for sure. Even if you look at the mission, the Intuitive Machines 2 mission that we're flying very soon, that has so many partners. There's Intuitive Machines that builds the lander. There's Lunar Outpost out of Boulder, Colorado that builds these rovers, and we're the communication provider. And then there's so many other payloads, and they have their own suppliers for some of their parts. Not everything is built in-house. So I think it is, pulling off a mission is very complex, so you need to have the right partners for all the pieces involved. And we're very fortunate that when we talked to NASA, they introduced us to a lot of the players in the industry, and we really were lucky to find Intuitive Machines and Lunar Outpost that they saw the same vision, and they wanted to be partners on this. And Intuitive Machines has their IM-2 mission that was already scheduled, and we said, can we be a payload on your mission that you're flying anyways? But I think in general, it's a complex ecosystem, but it's not a really big ecosystem. If you're in the industry for just a few years, you end up talking to the same people, and everybody shows up in different ways.
Are people eager to share? Or are they very private about what their IP is?
No, I think everybody's pretty eager to share. There's one large company that thinks they can do it on their own, and they try to more impose what they believe is the right technology, but everybody else we found very, very collaborative in the industry.
What were I'm glad he brought up the privatization element as part of some of my questions. What are some of the questions that you think about are the cybersecurity issues, for instance, or just national security issues that are posed by a mission like this that you had to consider in the communications development here?
Well, I think it's certainly the communication aspect. How do you protect the information that you're sending on the lunar surface and then back? Which I think for our initial mission, it's relatively, it's a CLPS program mission. CLPS stands for Commercial Lunar Payload Delivery System. So it's relatively low profile from that perspective. But when we start talking about the Artemis program, where we have astronauts going to the moon, or we think the future of this more extended human presence, certainly the geopolitical aspects will come in, the cybersecurity aspects come in, but we also think about what happens to the equipment on the moon after the mission ends. Our mission will go to the moon, deploy the network, operate it, but the equipment is not coming back. So what happens to the equipment on the moon? The current equipment or future equipment. So we talk about, can we put tamper-proof screws on the equipment so nobody can actually go in and open it up? Do you need a self-destruct button on your equipment? So we start thinking about those things, but not on.
What were the answers to those two questions?
Tamper-proof screws, yeah, absolutely.
No self-destruct?
Probably not for the early missions, yeah.
Yeah, right here.
Quick question, how does your approach scale and how
Yeah. Yeah, so when you think about AST Mobile or OneWeb, or they're providing coverage from Earth orbit to Earth. We are focused on providing communication on the moon itself. So AST Mobile is looking to use the same technologies, again, 3GPP, 4G, 5G based technologies that we use every day, but they're using that to put it on satellites and provide coverage on Earth. So technology-wise, it's similar technology space, but it's a very different market and very different deployment scenarios, because we're not looking at providing this from an Earth orbit to Earth on the ground. As a company, we are involved. We're partner for AST Mobile, but from this project, we're looking at lunar surface communication.
Is there a data transfer rate that you share that is what this can accomplish on the moon? And can you share the rate that we can handle today?
So right now, what NASA was looking at was really UHF, VHF radios, which transmit in terms of kilobits per second. Right? Your phone, you're easily sending several megabits per second. And with kilobits per second, you get telemetry data, but you can't do really video or image transmission. So on our surface network, we can get close to 100 megabits per second. The challenge we face is the link from the moon back to Earth. That's limited by what the link, that backhaul link is.
What is that rate right now?
That for our mission is in the less than 10 megabits per second.
And that's not changing anytime soon?
That is absolutely changing soon as well, because everybody realized that becomes the bottleneck. And people are looking at RF-based technologies, people are looking at optical technologies, and beyond the surface communication, we're also exploring what we can do from an RF or optical communication perspective to improve that backhaul link, what I call the backhaul link from Earth to moon and back.
I know right now we're talking about machine communication. At some point, I believe you imagine that astronauts are leveraging the same network. Can you walk me through, like, what we would, in the software world, what would be the user experience? Like, what is the device in my spacesuit that connects to this?
Yeah, so I'm not just imagining this at some point in the future. We actually announced in August that we have a partnership with a company called Axiom Space, which is a company out of Houston as well. They built the next generation spacesuits for the Artemis program and the International Space Station. If you're not familiar, the Artemis program is the main NASA program for humans landing back on the moon. Artemis 1 happened a couple of years back. Artemis 2 is scheduled for this coming year, and Artemis 3 is still scheduled for late 26, although we expect that to probably be delayed. But we're working with Axiom Space to integrate the same technology into the suit. So you can imagine that the voice communication from astronauts, or their helmet camera, or their biometric data will then also be sent over a 4G or 5G network. The astronauts can talk to each other. The astronauts can talk to somebody who's in the habitat. The astronauts can remotely control applications or robotic assets, and the astronauts will be able to talk and send information back to mission control. So the way you'd use your smartphone, but it's probably initially integrated into a suit, and then when astronauts are in the habitat, it's very likely that they will use smartphones the way we use them.
But the form factor must be different. Is there a heads-up display? How do they interact with the device?
Yeah, so when it's integrated in the suit, the module will be integrated into the life support system of the suit. They will have a button. It's basically on or off. Crew time is very precious, so you don't want astronauts to be able to push buttons and figure out things. It has to be super, super easy. They have gloved hands, so not your tiny keyboard will not work. So it's basically on and off, and then their biometric data will be streamed. Their voice, when they talk, will be streamed. Their helmet cameras will be on, and they will just stream that. So it's basically continuous. Now, then you can imagine, that's when they're on an EVA, on an extravehicular activity, where they have the suits on. But you can imagine when they're in vehicles or they're in the habitat, that they could then, they wouldn't be wearing suits. So then they can use smartphones the way we use them.
Did you get to put on a spacesuit?
No.
Are you hoping you will?
Probably not. I think I'll get claustrophobic if I put the suit on.
What are you most proud of in this project?
I think that we, when that initial mission with Vodafone and a German startup When that didn't happen, we hung in there. We could have said, okay, that was our best shot. That mission didn't work out. Let's stop it and do something else. But we still continue to believe that there's an opportunity, there's a need for this. And we hung in there and we kept talking to NASA and saying, and we found people in NASA that shared that vision that the cellular technologies should be used for space. And we just stayed with it.
Yeah.
I'll try to unwrap it. I think one big element to keep in mind is that this is the space economy, not the lunar economy. So this includes everything from satellites, Earth observation, using all the satellite communication on Earth, as well as navigation, remote connectivity, and so forth. I don't know exactly how big the space economy is today, and I'll have to get back to you on what the number is for the space economy today, or the lunar economy today and the lunar economy in 2035. But when you look at the number of missions that are planned from not just the US government, but a lot of government agencies as well as commercial entities, the number of missions is just really ramping up. Everybody thinks about the Artemis program, but there's so many commercial entities that plan on going to the moon. A lot of it is predicated on you believing that there is a space economy. If we just go plant the flag and come back and saying we've gone back to the moon, then a lot of this doesn't actually make sense because there is no communication need because there's no economy. But there are a lot of people that believe the moon and Mars are geopolitically important for the US and say US allied countries. It is a strategic objective for China for sure. And there's a lot of belief that if we want to explore deeper into the solar system and going to Mars, we need to use the moon as a launch pad. And you don't want to transport all the resources from Earth to moon. You want to harvest your resources on the moon because it's incredibly expensive to send material and resources to the moon. So you want that lunar economy to be self-sustaining and harvest the minerals and resources as much as you can for sustaining the economy on the moon and then using that as a launch pad to go to Mars and deeper space exploration. That I'd have to get back to you. It is a really big number, yeah. But take it with a grain of salt. This is a global number. Whether it includes defense spend or not, I'll have to get back to you on that.
Right up front.
It's about 300 billion, about 2020
You're saying the current market is 250, roughly 250 billion.
what they're talking about, 1.8 trillion, includes
Everything.
spend that's going to happen into the space.
Yeah, go ahead.
Have you thought about a cellular network on Mars? What kind of connection can we get between Mars and Earth?
Yeah, for sure. We're thinking that the same technology could also be used on Martian surface. In some sense, Mars is a little bit more benign than the Moon. So we'll start with Moon, but we also think the same technology should be used on Mars. The backhaul link is going to be much more challenging in terms of the delay of bringing information back from Mars to Earth, just based on the distance and physics. So I think when you get back from Mars, you definitely need optical technologies as opposed to RF technologies for backhaul. I think when you get to Mars, you also need a lot of more edge compute. You don't want to send everything back to Earth. I think you'll see that already with the Moon, but even more so with Mars. I think you will need to process a lot of the information locally as opposed to sending everything back. And I think we have to develop strategies for what information stays on the Moon or on Mars and process there locally for local decision making versus what is sent back to Earth.
What were the ethical considerations here?
Ethical considerations. From what perspective?
Sounds like that's the first time you've considered that.
Not yeah. We're thinking more astronaut safety, but
Well, the
what
national
aspect, yeah.
security piece, for instance, like who gets their hands on this technology, what information is shared, and with whom in particular, and perhaps how the very small number of folks who will engage in this data versus the sorts of problems that remain on Earth that have yet to be solved. Those are just my own thoughts. I'm curious what crossed your mind in this process.
So I think we think of this as taking the technologies from Earth to the Moon, but we're also thinking that technology will still be beneficial on Earth. We're not doing this as a hobby project. We think we learn a lot on the technology and we improve the technology that will also be beneficial on Earth.
How so? What can benefit on Earth from this?
So if I touched on a couple of examples of how it's important to miniaturize networks from a size, weight, and power. I think that's also beneficial if you deploy networks on a remote oil rig. You don't want to carry a lot of heavy equipment, but if you can miniaturize your network, size, weight, and power will always be beneficial. The other aspect is that this network on the Moon has to be self-deploying, self-configuring, because astronauts don't have time to be a telecom network operator. So this network will really push the boundary of autonomy, self-configuring, self-deploying, self-healing. And again, those aspects will be important when you go back to terrestrial networks in enterprise environments where you don't want the enterprise customer to spend a lot of time configuring networks. You want to really almost drop and forget your network if it's an oil rig or a remote wind farm or a mine in Australia. So some of those technologies I think will definitely be beneficial for how we build and deploy networks here.
Right here?
So you're saying that astronauts will be able to use cell phones in their downtime on the Moon in the future with this system. But how are you planning to cache and store data, entertainment files, movies, videos, photos on the Moon so that they are quickly and easily accessible? Or are you just going to account for this extreme transmission delay because of the distance? And then building off of that, are you looking to develop servers that will be on Earth-based consistent with that, or that could become part of a relay system between Mars, the Moon, and Earth to alleviate some of that time that usually goes to waiting for a response?
Yeah, I would think that to the first part of your question, you will definitely have some data storage and edge compute platforms on the Moon, on Mars in the future. So you don't send everything, you find the right time when you send information, and then you store locally. If you think about scientific experiments, do you want to send all your raw data back, or do you want to send the bottom line data back? Do you want to send all this data back and saying nothing changed? Or do you want to say now something changed and here's the new value that we detected on this experiment? So I think you'll see communication networks be coupled with mini data centers, call them edge compute platform, data servers, both for storage and for compute. So you'll see also from an AI analytics perspective, that will be added on to the communication network to process the information. It's not just about sending the information, it's also what is the information, what do you want to do with it, what does the data represent, and then storing it, and then bring it back to Earth if you need to. Maybe some missions will bring back hard drives with data.
I'm a social media marketer by heart, so my brain goes to astronauts waiting for YouTube to load while they're sitting there in their downtime, or trying to send FaceTime back, and it's 6.5 hours before that message goes through. So that's kind of just, I'm wondering how close can the experience of cell phone usage on the Moon get to the experience on Earth?
Yeah. Well, the delay between Moon and Earth is not hours, it's 1.5 seconds. So Mars is going to be much more challenging, of course. So I think there will be some of that, but there's also protocols that are built and designed to handle the delay. But of course, if it takes 1.5 seconds to send a bit, you're not going to have it instantaneously. But again, when you look at YouTube, you also have a lot of buffering. You get your video, you have buffering so that you have that seamless experience. We just need to make sure that that buffering takes into account the long delay that you have between Earth and Moon. But I think the interesting part will be voice communication. What's our protocol for talking to each other and not talking on top of each other when we have the 1.5 second delay? I think we'll just have to adjust to that, and there are certainly communication etiquettes that we need to develop on how we communicate. And well, what did you say? I didn't hear you, and then we start talking over each other.
I sort of deliberately omitted, and there was nothing wrong with that question, but questions like what social media will they be watching on the moon? Because I assumed that's a ridiculous thing to ask. And hearing her say it out loud, I'm curious, did NASA request from the human experience that astronauts be able to, like, is there a browser experience, and do you expect that social media will be one of the use cases early on, or ever?
No, we're not at that point with NASA. I think it's more...
When you mentioned biometric data, was there other surprising, were there other more human elements besides biometric data, but entertainment-driven things to keep astronauts entertained that this enables that you were asked to include in this network?
No, not necessarily from the surface communication. For us, it's very focused on providing communication outside of the vehicle when the astronauts are doing their missions. Then inside the vehicle, you may have your local Wi-Fi access point inside your vehicle, and that's how they connect with each other, or you have your local 5G network inside the vehicle. I think NASA is very focused right now on going back to the moon and making sure the astronauts can have the communication from a mission criticality perspective. I think the rest will come, and it's easy to put in Wi-Fi access point inside the ship so that the astronauts can talk to each other or share their emails internally and so forth. I think the hard part is really when you go out of the spaceship and you go 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, 5 kilometers away from the lander.
It sounds like you are saying, though, that you imagine a world where astronauts on the moon would have access to social media.
Yeah, because I distinguish between the astronaut being inside the habitat and the astronauts being outside on the habitat. When the astronauts are inside the habitat, sure, they have their downtime. They will want to FaceTime with their friends. They will want to FaceTime with their family. They may want to take selfies. They want to keep themselves busy from an entertainment media, check the news on Earth. So I think there is a whole part of what are the astronauts doing when they are inside the habitat, which will look very similar to, I think, how we connect when we're at home. It's just the home that's far away. Then there is how do astronauts communicate with each other and with machines and sensors when they're outside. And then the whole thing is how do we connect back from the moon to Earth where we have the delay. I do absolutely think that they will take selfies.
Yeah, well, they do that now, but the social media piece is interesting. Has the ascension of SpaceX, in particular Elon Musk, been a positive thing for the space industry?
Yeah, I think for sure it completely changed the economics for launches. It completely changed I think it created a renewed interest in space. And from a technological perspective, it's amazing what they're doing in terms of launching rockets and landing, now catching the rocket on the chopsticks. I think it's just fantastic what they're able to do from a technological perspective.
Have you seen any correlation between an increased interest in talent in this project that corresponds to that recent landing?
I mean, I think it's too early to say because that landing on the chopsticks was just a couple of months back. I think there is a lot of interest in space, a lot of interest in just the space industry in general. I think there's been renewed interest in that over the last 5-10 years. It's almost becoming too routine again. I think the first time when they landed, everybody was watching. The first time they launched a crew to the International Space Station, everybody was watching. Now it's you have 3 Falcon 9 launches a week. It's routine again.
Yeah, we're easily bored. Yeah, right there. Yep.
How do you commercialize this to realize revenue? Are you selling bandwidth
So that gets a little bit to how we see this evolution from the first mission to the next 10 years. I think this year going into next year, we have this first mission where you deploy a network, and it's very much a network for mission. Where the evolution comes for us from working with NASA on the Artemis program is standardize on the technology for a program. But once you go back to the same area on the moon, it does not make sense for every mission to bring its own network. You want that infrastructure to be there, and anybody going to the moon will benefit from that communication infrastructure. So imagine you're going to Australia. You're not bringing a network with you. There's a network that's deployed. You have your phone, you get your SIM card there, or you have your roaming plan, and you connect to a local network that's deployed. So we think similarly there would be essentially a service provider on the moon that will have the infrastructure, and anybody going to the moon, if you have payload, you have astronauts going, you have robots going, you need to get a data plan, essentially. You need to get the device integrated into your payload, and you get a data plan to then connect to the infrastructure. I think that's the only model, well, the only model is maybe a hard word to say, but I think that's the best model when you have a lot of missions going to the same area, and you can scale out your infrastructure, and everybody benefits from it rather than everybody bringing their own infrastructure. And I think there was one very interesting program started last year going into this year with DARPA called Luna 10, where they asked, they selected 14 companies. We were fortunate enough to be selected as well, and they asked questions of what does that lunar infrastructure, cross-sector infrastructure look like 10, 15 years out in the future? Not from an astronaut perspective, but just imagine you have this lunar economy with a lot of resource mining and drilling and transportation, and you have this economic activity. What are the cross-sector infrastructures you need? And communication is one, but you have all these companies that provide railroads, provide robotic assets, resource mining, drilling, and so forth. They require communication, but in return, if we provide the communication network, we need construction. We need somebody to put up towers so we can put the antenna on top of the tower. We need somebody to provide power so we can provide the equipment. So it became this multi-sector infrastructure program to saying, what are the end use cases and applications? What are the requirements from those use cases on communication? And what are the requirements that in return communication places on other infrastructures? Do you have a 200-meter tall tower where you can put your antenna and provide coverage to the entire economy? Do you put the antenna on top of habitats? Do you put the antenna on top of vehicles? Do you put the antenna on the solar panel array? So it became this multi-faceted infrastructure. And I think that's the way to go, that you don't want to bring the infrastructure with every mission, particularly if you go to the same space. If you go to different areas of the moon, then of course the first mission will have to bring the infrastructure.
Way in the back, yeah.
Your point about Musk is very interesting because I've been reading he has plans to do what's called Moonlink, which is anecdotal to Starlink. So in 10 or 15 years, Musk is the million-pound gorilla, which Aaron pointed out. Musk is the million-pound gorilla Aaron pointed out. And he has a Starlink surrounding the moon called Moonlink. If Moonlink is there, why is your product even viable?
Well, I think Moonlink is not there. There's a need before. If you make the analogy with Starlink, why are you not using Starlink? Why are you still using your 5G phone to connect to a network on Earth? I think the data rates that you can get are still larger than if you connect to a satellite for your connectivity. One of the other challenges with satellites in lunar orbit is they will most likely be on elliptical orbits, and you won't always have a satellite above you, or you need to put a lot of satellites in orbit to always have satellites above you. So I think there's a question of the economics, because if you need to deploy a lot of satellites just so that two astronauts can talk to each other when they're within a few meters of each other, and you have a lot of satellites so that they can talk to each other and always have a satellite above them, the economics of that may not be right. the data rates you get to satellites is not the same data rates that you can get locally by providing the connectivity on the surface. And then it's a timing question. I think you don't want to wait until you have all the satellites for that first mission to have communication capabilities.
Over here.
Now, Musk might prove me wrong, but that's my thesis right now.
Have you spoken to him about space travel?
No,
We should make that happen.
I'm waiting.
We have this
for
big event, Propellify. That would be a good stage for that
You
sort
should
of thing.
invite him, and I'll,
We should.
I'll come. Yeah.
You might be able to help there. Go ahead.
So to the space economy, like once all this infrastructure is set up, obviously there'll be lots of economies setting up the infrastructure. But once it's set up, beyond the geopolitical things you mentioned earlier, military things, land grabs, what is the space economy of the future? Mining, tourism, what is it doing that we don't currently have access to?
So I'll give you the positive and the maybe not so positive answer. The positive answer is yes, there will be, beyond the geopolitical aspect, there will be the resource mining, the drilling, finding minerals that you need to sustain that presence and go to Mars. I don't necessarily believe that we want to go to the moon, extract minerals, and bring them back to Earth. At least I'm not aware of that. We might find minerals that we absolutely need on Earth and we don't have on Earth and we have only on the moon, and it's so valuable to bring them back. But the cost of bringing things to the moon and bringing them back is just very expensive. Then you get into that sustaining an economy for space exploration, for our human understanding of the universe. Then you have the tourism aspect, sure. As much as I would love to go to the moon, I'm not really excited about the tourism part. So I'm more interested in the scientific exploration, human understanding, and then building that economy to sustain that. So that's maybe the positive side of what could happen. The negative side, when we were at this DARPA meeting that I mentioned, we asked some people from DARPA what they thought, and everybody, not just us, but everybody in that program challenged them, what is the gold rush that will drive us to go to the moon? And there was really not a good answer among DARPA and the 14 companies where we go like, this is the one, and we're 100% sure that this is the driver for it and will for sure happen. The one that everybody agreed to will drive it is geopolitical. But whether this will happen from a resource mining, drilling, scientific exploration, it's still a risky proposition.
A quick one.
As you're building this out, are you concerned about someone like China or Russia trying to build out their own cell network and competition between them for satellites?
Yes, for sure, and that's maybe to expand on the question earlier when I said there is a service provider infrastructure or a service provider that provides the infrastructure. We think the market may not be large enough that you have exactly what happened on the terrestrial networks, where in the US you have 4 or 5, in every country in Europe you have 3 service providers. So there may only be 1 or 2 Western aligned infrastructure providers, and then there might be a Russian, Chinese aligned infrastructure provider. That's likely. Maybe there's a sort of a neutral third one. That's why we believe it's important to get there early and really push this, because there may not be a fast follower opportunity. And then, are you concerned about the aspect? Well, that was the answer to Aaron's question of, do you have the self-destruct button or the tamper-proof screws?
So a few more questions, and then unfortunately we don't have any time for additional questions from the audience, but I think Thierry's going to stick around for a little bit afterwards. Perhaps the dumbest question, but why do we care about? Nokia Bell Labs is, I believe, tasked with trying to solve some of the world's most pressing problems. We have some of the brightest engineering talent on the planet in these buildings. Why is this a problem worth solving right now?
I think I would say there's 2 answers. One is, if you believe this lunar economy happens, if you believe that as a species...
I'm sure you don't believe, I'm sorry to interrupt you, that the capitalistic reason to do this, though, as an engineer at heart, is the reason to pursue it. There are lots of ways to make money.
There are lots of ways to make money, but how much money do you want to make? You can say, I'm only investing in one aspect, but if this economy happens, there is a need for this. Why are we going into space right now? We are already going to space. So from our perspective, I believe that if space exploration happens, you absolutely need advanced communication capabilities. Somebody needs to provide that, and it might as well be us. Now, is that a $1 trillion business for us on just the communication aspect? Maybe not, but doesn't mean that you should not do it and you cannot make good money on it. I think that's one aspect. The engineer in me will say, I just want to solve the hardest technical problem, and I cannot think of a harder communication problem than build the tiniest, low power, low footprint network that I deploy 250,000 miles away, and it has to run completely autonomously without you or me being there to push the button to turn it on and configure it. So I'm just excited about that technology challenge, but I'm not doing technology for the sake of it. I'm doing it because I do believe there is a bigger goal. Is that a risky proposition? Sure, but any innovation is risky.
I know your parents are in the audience, your son's here. What do you hope that this may inspire in your son's generation, or perhaps even, the generation after that?
Well, I'm going to put our son on the spot. Wave, Justin, say hi. There you go.
I wasn't trying to embarrass you. He did that.
So I think he thinks that I'm the guy who's doing PowerPoint and email, and I joke that coming home and saying I'm the one who puts the first network on the moon makes you cool at home. So I hope.
Forget the capital. You should have started with that. Forget capitalism. I'm now a cool dad. That's reason number
cool
one.
Again. No, I hope that. For me, it started in 81. I was just fascinated in space, but also realized that I couldn't be an astronaut. So it's kind of what's the next best thing to do? And there's an element that if astronauts go to the moon and they do these incredibly dangerous missions, and I don't have the courage to be an astronaut myself, maybe the next best thing that I can do is develop technology to keep them safe. And for everybody on Earth that cannot go, can I develop technology so we get a little bit of a view of what their mission is by sharing their data, sharing their videos, and getting that glimpse. So it's a little bit of the emotional connection that I don't have the courage to be there, but maybe the next best thing is I can have everybody essentially be there or virtually be there.
You heard me in the opening remarks talk about New Jersey doesn't get a lot of love, and this is a fascinating, important, and interesting global story. How is this also a New Jersey story? And then two-pronged question, since this is mostly a New Jersey audience, what can we all do to help you?
So I think it's in New Jersey just by fact that Bell Labs is here, this started here, I'm here. Our team is actually quite global across the US also. We're here in New Jersey. We have a team in Sunnyvale, California. We have a team in Dallas, Texas. But I'm still here. So for me, this is a New Jersey story. This started here. I'll take a little bit of credit for raising my hand twice in 2018. So I think this is very much a New Jersey story. I love the 3 presentations from the startups. I will definitely follow up with all of you. I think anybody that has ideas, anybody that wants to join us, anybody that has questions to challenge us, but anybody who also has ideas and saying, have you thought about this? What about that? I think there's so much ingenuity, so much engineering, so much creative ideas in New Jersey. We cannot do it alone. So anybody that wants to join us, very happy to have conversations. And I'm really excited. I think what you're doing with 3D printing, and not just for habitats, I think we cannot ship all the spare parts to the moon. So I think we need to find a way to have the materials. Again, you don't want to send the materials. You talked about the regolith. You want to use the material that's there. You want to have your 3D printer, and then you want to print the parts you need, as opposed to shipping every spare part that you can possibly think of, and most of them you might not need. So I think we need to, what you're doing feeds into that self-sustaining economy, and it's just exciting.
Yeah. There's a quote whose the originator, I'm sure someone here can tell me later, but around the idea of some people see things as they are and say, why? I see things as they are not and say, as they could be and say, why not? And I think this is the embodiment of why not. Can we get a big round of applause for Thierry Klein? Thank you very much.